The first ambulance was turned away at 11:47 p.m. The paramedic's voice crackled through the radio, confused and urgent. "Dispatch, we're being denied entry to Metropolitan General. They're saying the hospital is under federal investigation." The second ambulance arrived 3 minutes later, sirens wailing, only to be met by police tape and grim-faced officers who shook their heads and pointed toward the highway. By midnight, 7 emergency vehicles had been diverted to hospitals 30 miles away, their patients growing weaker with each passing minute. Inside the emergency department, Dr. Marcus Williams watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across his dark face as he stood frozen beside a gurney that should have held a heart attack patient. Instead, the bed remained empty, its pristine white sheets a stark reminder of the lives hanging in the balance. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself, his hands trembling as he pulled off his surgical gloves. "Doctor!" Keisha Thompson burst through the swing doors, her scrubs still damp with perspiration from an operation that had been abruptly terminated. "Marcus, they've shut down the OR," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Federal agents are confiscating our transplant records. They're saying we're under investigation for organ trafficking." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, each syllable carrying the weight of careers destroyed and patients condemned. Just 6 hours earlier, the same emergency department had been buzzing with purposeful energy. Dr. Williams had been preparing for what would have been the hospital's most ambitious transplant procedure, yet a double lung transplant for a teenage girl whose life hung by a thread. The Metropolitan General Hospital had become a beacon of hope in the medical community, largely due to the groundbreaking work of its transplant team, led by the brilliant partnership of Dr. Williams and Dr. Thompson. Their innovative techniques had saved hundreds of lives and earned them national recognition, including a feature story in the New England Journal of Medicine just 2 months prior. The hospital's transplant program had been Dr. Williams' life work. He had spent 15 years building it from nothing, starting as a young resident with big dreams and an unwavering belief that every patient deserved a chance at life. His reputation was built on meticulous attention to detail, compassionate patient care, and surgical skills that had earned him invitations to speak at medical conferences around the world. Dr. Thompson, his closest colleague and friend, had joined the program 5 years ago, bringing with her a revolutionary approach to post-operative care that had dramatically improved patient outcomes. Their partnership had transformed Metropolitan General from a struggling urban hospital into a premier medical facility. Insurance companies fought to have their patients treated there. Medical students competed for residency positions. The waiting list for organ transplants had been cut in half, and the survival rates were among the highest in the nation. It was everything Dr. Williams had dreamed of when he first put on a white coat. But Karen Mitchell had different plans. Karen had first appeared at the hospital 3 weeks earlier, accompanying her elderly father to what should have been a routine consultation about his failing kidneys. She was a woman in her late 40s, with carefully styled blonde hair and an air of entitlement that seemed to precede her into every room. Her father, Harold Mitchell, was a sweet man in his 70s who had worked as a janitor for 40 years and now faced the prospect of dialysis or worse. Dr. Williams had explained the treatment options with his usual combination of medical expertise and gentle compassion. But Karen had immediately bristled at the mention of costs and insurance coverage. "Excuse me, doctor," she had interrupted, her voice sharp and dismissive. "My father has insurance. Good insurance. He shouldn't have to worry about any of this financial nonsense." Dr. Williams had patiently explained that while Medicare would cover most of the treatment, There were still significant out-of-pocket expenses for medications and follow-up care. The explanation had sent Karen into a fury that surprised everyone in the room. "This is ridiculous," she had snapped, her face flushing red with indignation. "We've been paying into the system for decades, and now you're telling me my father can't get the care he needs. What kind of scam are you people running here?" Her father had tried to calm her down, embarrassed by the outburst. But Karen was just getting started. She had demanded to speak to administrators, threatened to file complaints, and accused the hospital of price gouging vulnerable patients. The confrontation had escalated when Dr. Williams calmly suggested that she speak with the financial counselors who could help navigate the insurance maze. "Don't you dare patronize me," Karen had hissed, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "I know exactly what's going on here. You people see an old white man and think you can take advantage of him. Well, you picked the wrong family to mess with." The racial undertone of her comment had hung in the air like poison. But Dr. Williams had maintained his professional composure, offering additional resources and promising to do everything possible to help her father. That night, Karen had gone home and begun her research. She scoured medical websites, read conspiracy theories about organ trafficking, and convinced herself that something sinister was happening at Metropolitan General. The more she read, the more certain she became that the hospital's success was built on something illegal. The fact that the transplant program was led by black doctors only confirmed her suspicions in her twisted mind. She began making calls to various agencies, filing complaints, and demanding investigations into what she was certain was a criminal enterprise masquerading as a medical facility. Her accusations had initially been dismissed by authorities who recognized them as the rantings of a disgruntled family member. But Karen was persistent, and she was clever. She began fabricating evidence, creating fake documents, and weaving together legitimate medical procedures with sinister interpretations that painted Dr. Williams and his team as criminals, preying on vulnerable patients. She spent hours crafting elaborate theories about how organs were being harvested from patients who couldn't pay, how the high success rates were the result of illegal organ purchases, and how the entire operation was a front for human trafficking. The call came at 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Karen's voice was steady and convincing as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher, her words carefully chosen to create maximum impact. "I need to report a crime in progress at Metropolitan General Hospital," she said, her tone urgent but controlled. "There are doctors there who are trafficking human organs. They're taking organs from patients who can't pay and selling them on the black market. People are dying because of what they're doing." The dispatcher, trained to take all calls seriously, asked for more details. Karen was ready with them. She claimed to have witnessed conversations between doctors about organ prices, to have seen patients disappear after routine procedures, and to have discovered documents proving the illegal activities. She provided names, dates, and specific allegations that sounded credible enough to warrant immediate investigation. "You need to stop them tonight," she insisted. "There's a major surgery scheduled, and I believe they're planning to harvest organs from a teenage patient." Within minutes, the wheels of law enforcement were in motion. Federal agents were contacted, warrants were requested, and a task force was assembled to investigate what appeared to be a major criminal conspiracy. The fact that the allegations involved organ trafficking, one of the most serious crimes in the medical field, meant that immediate action was required to protect potential victims. By 11:30 p.m., unmarked cars were surrounding the hospital, and federal agents were preparing to execute search warrants. Dr. Williams had been reviewing surgical notes when the first agents appeared at his office door. Their badges glinted in the fluorescent light as they informed him that the hospital was under investigation and that all transplant activities were to cease immediately. The confusion on his face was genuine and heartbreaking. This was a man who had dedicated his life to saving others, and now he was being treated like a common criminal. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you accusing us of?" The lead agent, a stern woman with gray hair and cold eyes, recited the allegations in a monotone voice that made them sound even more damning. Organ trafficking, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. Each charge felt like a physical blow to Dr. Williams, who sank into his chair as the weight of the accusations settled over him. Throughout the hospital, similar scenes were playing out. Dr. Thompson was pulled from the middle of reviewing patient charts, her hands still stained with ink, as agents informed her that she was being investigated for conspiracy to commit organ trafficking. Nurses watched in shock as filing cabinets were emptied and computer hard drives were confiscated. The transplant coordinator, a dedicated woman who had worked tirelessly to match donors with recipients, broke down in tears as years of her work were loaded into evidence boxes. The media arrived within hours, drawn by the sensational nature of the allegations and the dramatic sight of federal agents raiding one of the city's most respected hospitals. News vans lined the street outside Metropolitan General, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic flowers seeking sunlight. Reporters pressed against police barriers, shouting questions at anyone who emerged from the building. The story had everything that made for compelling television: respected doctors accused of heinous crimes, a major hospital shutdown, and patients left without care. By dawn, the story had gone national. Cable news channels ran breathless reports about the organ trafficking scandal that had rocked the medical community. Photos of Dr. Williams and Dr. Thompson appeared on screen alongside dramatic graphics about illegal organ sales and patient exploitation. Social media exploded with outrage and conspiracy theories, as people who had never heard of Metropolitan General Hospital became experts on its alleged crimes. The human cost of the shutdown became apparent almost immediately. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an 82-year-old woman waiting for a kidney transplant, watched the news coverage from her hospital bed with tears streaming down her face. She had been scheduled for surgery the following week, a procedure that would have given her several more years of life. Now she faced the prospect of returning to dialysis, while authorities sorted through the false allegations that had destroyed her hopes. 17-year-old Maria Santos was even more devastated. The double lung transplant that could have saved her life had been canceled along with all other procedures. Her parents sat beside her bed, holding her hands as she struggled to breathe, knowing that every day of delay decreased her chances of survival. The organs that had been designated for her surgery were redirected to another hospital, but the complex logistics of transplant surgery meant that it would be weeks before another opportunity arose. Dr. Williams found himself at the center of a media firestorm that seemed to grow more intense with each passing hour. Reporters camped outside his home, shouting questions about organ prices and patient murders as he tried to shield his family from the chaos. His wife, an elementary school teacher, was placed on administrative leave, while the school district determined whether her association with an accused criminal made her unfit to work with children. Their teenage son was harassed at school, with classmates and even teachers treating him like the child of a monster. The investigation consumed every aspect of the hospital's operations. Financial records dating back 10 years were seized and analyzed. Patient files were scrutinized for signs of irregularities. Former employees were interviewed and asked to provide information about suspicious activities. The thoroughness of the investigation was both impressive and terrifying, as agents left no stone unturned in their search for evidence of the alleged crimes. But as days turned into weeks, cracks began to appear in Karen's carefully constructed narrative. The first sign of trouble came when investigators reviewed the hospital's financial records and found them to be scrupulously maintained and completely transparent. Every dollar was accounted for, every transaction documented, and every payment properly recorded. The organ procurement organization that worked with the hospital provided glowing testimonials about the integrity and professionalism of the transplant team. Former patients came forward to defend the doctors who had saved their lives. They spoke passionately about the compassionate care they had received, the tireless dedication of the medical staff, and the miraculous recoveries that had given them second chances at life. Their testimonials painted a picture of a medical program that was the opposite of the criminal enterprise Karen had described. The breakthrough came when investigators decided to review the hospital's extensive security camera system. Metropolitan General had invested heavily in surveillance equipment, not for spying on employees, but for protecting patients and preventing theft of medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. Cameras covered every hallway, every entrance, and most importantly, every area where medical records were stored. Agent Sarah Martinez was reviewing footage from the night before Karen's initial complaint when she noticed something unusual. A woman matching Karen's description was seen entering the hospital through a side entrance at 2:17 a.m., using what appeared to be a keycard. The timestamp showed this was 3 days before she had filed her first complaint, and there was no record of her having any legitimate reason to be in the building at that hour. Further review of the footage revealed Karen's systematic infiltration of the hospital's record system. She was captured on camera entering the medical records office, photographing patient files, and most damning of all, placing documents into files where they didn't belong. The planted evidence included fake invoices for organ purchases, forged correspondence about illegal activities, and doctored medical records that supported her trafficking allegations. The security footage also revealed how Karen had obtained access to the hospital. Her sister worked in the billing department and had unwittingly provided her with a keycard during a family visit, never imagining that it would be used for such a malicious purpose. Karen had copied the card and returned the original, giving her unlimited access to areas of the hospital that should have been secure. Agent Martinez watched in growing amazement as the cameras documented Karen's methodical campaign of deception. She had planted evidence in patient files, created fake communications between doctors, and even staged photographs that appeared to show suspicious activities. The level of planning and premeditation was staggering, demonstrating a criminal mind that had carefully orchestrated the destruction of innocent people's lives and careers. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Federal prosecutors who had been preparing criminal charges against the doctors suddenly found themselves facing the reality that their star witness was actually the criminal. The evidence against Dr. Williams and his team evaporated overnight, replaced by overwhelming proof of Karen's elaborate fraud. Dr. Williams was at home, sitting in his darkened kitchen at 3 a.m., when Agent Martinez called to inform him that he was no longer a suspect. The relief in his voice was audible as she explained that the investigation had uncovered evidence of a deliberate frame-up orchestrated by Karen Mitchell. But the exoneration, while welcome, couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. The news of Karen's deception broke on a Thursday morning, but by then, the narrative of criminal doctors had become entrenched in the public consciousness. Social media posts calling for the doctor's imprisonment had been shared thousands of times. Conspiracy websites had woven the false allegations into elaborate theories about medical corruption and racial conspiracies. The truth struggled to compete with the sensational lies that had captured the public's imagination. Congressional hearings were already scheduled, with lawmakers demanding answers about how such a massive criminal conspiracy could have operated for years without detection. The hearings proceeded even after Karen's arrest, as politicians found it easier to grandstand about medical corruption than to admit they had been fooled by a single woman's lies. Committee members grilled health officials about oversight failures and demanded new regulations to prevent future organ trafficking schemes. Dr. Thompson sat in the witness chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap, as she faced a panel of senators who seemed determined to treat her as a criminal, despite the evidence of her innocence. "Senator," she said in response to a particularly aggressive question about organ procurement procedures, "I have dedicated my life to saving patients, not exploiting them. The evidence clearly shows that we have been the victims of a deliberate campaign of deception." But the senator, playing to television cameras and campaign donors, wasn't interested in evidence. "Dr. Thompson, how do you explain the fact that your hospital had the highest transplant success rates in the country? Isn't it suspicious that you were so much more successful than other programs?" The implication was clear. Success itself was evidence of wrongdoing, a twisted logic that turned excellence into guilt. Dr. Williams testified alongside his colleague, his voice steady but tinged with sadness as he described the destruction of everything he had worked to build. "We succeeded because we cared," he said simply. "We worked longer hours, developed better techniques, and never gave up on our patients. Our success came from dedication, not corruption. The real crime here is that patients are dying while we sit in this room defending ourselves against lies." The hearings were a circus, broadcast live on multiple networks, and dissected endlessly by pundits who knew nothing about medicine but everything about politics. Karen's arrest was mentioned as a footnote, but the focus remained on the doctors who had been victimized by her schemes. It was easier to assume that successful black professionals must be hiding something than to admit that a white woman had successfully manipulated the system to destroy their lives. But justice, while delayed, was not denied. Federal prosecutors, embarrassed by their role in Karen's scheme, threw themselves into building a case against her with the same intensity they had once directed at the innocent doctors. The evidence was overwhelming: security footage, planted documents, falsified reports, and witness testimony that painted a picture of a woman consumed by racial hatred and personal grievance. Karen's trial became a sensation in its own right, though it received far less media coverage than the original allegations against the doctors. She sat in the defendant's chair, her carefully styled hair now disheveled, her air of entitlement replaced by the haunted look of someone whose lies had finally caught up with her. The prosecution methodically dismantled her defense, showing the jury exactly how she had fabricated evidence and manipulated the investigation. Her father, Harold Mitchell, testified against her with tears in his eyes. The elderly man, whose kidney problems had started this whole nightmare, spoke about his shame and disbelief at what his daughter had done. "She told me she was protecting me," he said, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. "But she was destroying innocent people who only wanted to help. I don't understand how someone I raised could do such terrible things." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts, filing false police reports, fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and a hate crime enhancement that added years to her potential sentence. Karen showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a veteran jurist known for her no-nonsense approach to justice, delivered a scathing rebuke during sentencing. "Ms. Mitchell, your actions represent more than just a personal vendetta," she said, looking directly at the defendant. "You weaponize the justice system against innocent people based on nothing more than racial prejudice and personal spite. You caused immeasurable harm not just to the doctors you targeted, but to the patients who were denied care because of your lies." The sentence was 15 years in federal prison, with restitution ordered for the millions of dollars in damages caused by the hospital shutdown. Karen's assets, including her home and savings, were seized to help compensate the victims of her scheme. But no amount of money could restore the reputations that had been damaged or save the patients who had died waiting for care. Metropolitan General Hospital reopened 6 months after Karen's conviction, but the road to recovery was long and difficult. Dr. Williams and Dr. Thompson returned to their positions, but they faced the challenge of rebuilding a program that had been decimated by false accusations. Many of their colleagues had found positions elsewhere, and recruiting new staff required convincing talented professionals to join a team that had been publicly branded as criminals. The first surgery after the reopening was Maria Santos's lung transplant, delayed by 8 months, but finally possible thanks to the dedication of doctors who refused to give up on their patients. Her parents wept with joy as Dr. Williams explained that matching organs had become available and that their daughter would finally get the chance at life she deserved. The surgery was a complete success, and Maria's recovery became a symbol of the hospital's resilience. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson also received her kidney transplant, though her condition had deteriorated significantly during the delay. At 83, she was older and frailer than when the nightmare began, but her spirit remained unbroken. "These doctors are heroes," she told a reporter who asked about her experience. "They saved my life, despite everything that was done to them. If that's not the definition of courage, I don't know what is." The recognition came slowly but steadily. Medical journals published detailed accounts of the frame-up and its aftermath, holding up Metropolitan General as an example of how excellence can become a target for those motivated by hatred and jealousy. Professional organizations issued formal apologies for their initial rush to judgment, and colleagues who had distanced themselves during the crisis returned with offers of support and collaboration. The pinnacle of vindication came 18 months after Karen's conviction, when Dr. Williams and Dr. Thompson were invited to the White House to receive Presidential Medals of Freedom for their contributions to medicine and their grace under fire. Standing in the Rose Garden, with their families beside them and the nation watching, they represented the triumph of truth over lies, of dedication over destruction. President Sarah Chen spoke eloquently about the importance of excellence in medicine and the dangers of allowing prejudice to corrupt the pursuit of justice. "These doctors faced the worst kind of false accusations," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "They were targeted not for their failures, but for their success. They were attacked not for harming patients, but for saving them. Their response to this injustice, continuing to serve others, despite the personal cost, exemplifies the best of American medicine and the human spirit." Dr. Williams accepted his medal with characteristic humility, but his words carried the weight of everything he and his colleagues had endured. "We didn't choose to become symbols of anything," he said. "We just wanted to save lives. But if our experience can prevent others from facing similar injustices, if it can remind people that excellence should be celebrated rather than suspected, then perhaps some good can come from our suffering." The hospital that had been nearly destroyed by one woman's lies was now stronger than ever. The transplant program expanded, with new facilities and additional staff recruited from the best medical schools in the country. Young doctors competed for the chance to train under Dr. Williams and Dr. Thompson, viewing them as heroes who had proven that integrity and skill could overcome even the most vicious attacks. Karen Mitchell served her sentence in federal prison, where she had plenty of time to contemplate the destruction she had caused. She never expressed remorse for her actions, maintaining to the end that she had been justified in her suspicions despite the complete lack of evidence to support them. Her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing prejudice and personal grievances to override facts and common sense. The patients who had been caught in the crossfire of Karen's vendetta gradually rebuilt their lives as well. Maria Santos graduated from high school with honors and announced her intention to become a doctor herself, inspired by the professionals who had saved her life despite facing their own persecution. Mrs. Patterson lived another 5 years with her transplanted kidney, spending her remaining time volunteering at the hospital and telling anyone who would listen about the wonderful doctors who had given her a second chance. 5 years after the crisis began, Metropolitan General Hospital hosted a symposium on medical ethics and the importance of protecting healthcare professionals from false accusations. Dr. Williams delivered the keynote address to an audience of medical professionals, law enforcement officials, and policymakers. His message was both a warning and a call to action. "What happened to us could happen to any of you," he said, looking out at the packed auditorium. "Excellence is not a shield against false accusations. Success does not protect you from those who would rather see you fail than admit their own shortcomings. But we cannot let fear drive us from our calling. Patients depend on us to be brave, to be excellent, and to never give up, not on them, and not on ourselves." The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained, a recognition not just of his words, but of the journey that had brought him to that podium. In the audience, former patients wiped away tears, colleagues nodded in agreement, and young medical students took notes, knowing they were witnessing history. As the evening wound down and the last attendees filed out of the auditorium, Dr. Williams stood quietly on the stage where he had just delivered his address. Dr. Thompson joined him, and together they looked out at the empty seats where hundreds of people had just heard their story of persecution and redemption. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked, her voice barely audible in the vast space. Dr. Williams considered the question for a long moment before answering. "The suffering, the humiliation, the months of uncertainty and fear. No, that wasn't worth anything. But what came after the vindication, the recognition, the knowledge that we helped prevent this from happening to others, maybe that makes it bearable." Outside the hospital, the city continued its nightly rhythm of emergency calls and medical crises. Ambulances rushed through the streets with their sirens wailing, carrying patients to hospitals where dedicated professionals worked around the clock to save lives. Metropolitan General Hospital stood ready to receive them, its emergency department bright with fluorescent light, its operating rooms prepared for whatever challenges the night might bring. The nightmare that had begun with one woman's malicious phone call was finally over. The lies had been exposed, the truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. But more importantly, the work of healing continued. In operating rooms and patient wards, in research labs and consultation offices, doctors and nurses and technicians carried on the eternal mission of medicine to cure sometimes, to comfort always, and to never stop fighting for the lives entrusted to their care. The story of Metropolitan General Hospital became required reading in medical schools across the country, a reminder that the practice of medicine exists within the larger context of society, with all its prejudices and injustices. But it also served as an inspiration, proving that truth and dedication can triumph over lies and hatred, that excellence will ultimately be recognized, and that the commitment to saving lives is stronger than any force that seeks to destroy it. As dawn broke over the city, casting golden light through the windows of the hospital, a new day began with the promise of healing and hope. The phones in the emergency department rang with calls for help, the operating rooms filled with the steady beeping of monitors, and somewhere in the building, another life was being saved by doctors whose only crime had been caring too much. The darkness had passed, the light had returned, and the work of healing went on.